Well, let's move on to your fourth wine.
Let's crack on. The next one is 2020 Nightjar. So this is the sibling wine to the Chardonnay. So same vineyards, same aging process. So it's a year of aging complete. In fact, the Pinot Noir Chardonnay and the vineyard are about 5 rows apart. So
Okay.
again, it's in terms of, you hear a lot about block selection or parcel selection, and we do that with Clay Hill. We are able to choose our own rows and our grape clones, etc. So again, we have Burgundy clones. This time we have 2, 777 and 115. 777 really being a global Pinot workhorse. It's a bit more fruity, so slightly more accessible. Larger berries. 115, it will be smaller clusters, smaller bunches, smaller berries, and it gives more sort of structure, tannin, savory notes. And normally this wine gets about 10% new oak, but as I said earlier, 2020 is a great year, but it was really low yielding. So we only made just shy of 1,500 bottles of this. And so we dropped the new oak out of it, but we increased the whole cluster, which is a bit of an anomaly in the UK. A lot of people don't use whole cluster in the reds, and understandably so. It's quite a tricky thing to navigate, because if the grapes aren't ripe enough, you then get these really sort of stringent green tannins and sort of this slightly underripe abrasive flavoring in the wine itself, which doesn't ever go away. But if you use it in the right way and you manage it well enough, and grapes are ripe enough, it adds this really lovely sort of sappy greenness, the sappiness to it, the spicy notes, which for me is pretty integral for what we do. And this is, again, going back to building out texture in the wine and building out body. And whole clusters are a way to do that without being completely intrusive or sort of extracting too much. So this is mainly fermented in stainless steel, open top fermenters. We have 35% whole cluster in this. There are some newer barrels, so you might get a little bit of the sweet spice coming through in that. But it's really down to the quality of the fruit in this case. And for me, again, wine needs a bit more time. I feel it's quite sort of a chunkier style of Pinot, I think, for England, and it's bottled in September. So it's really, we're talking about 6 months in bottle. Well, it really needs a year plus. But you get these amazing sort of red fruit characters and sort of these savory sour cherry, black cherry, bit of rose smokiness to it, and then you get, again, some of that green sort of sappy tannin, spicier notes, licorice, and you get more down the palate. So it's I think it's quite so I wouldn't call it by any means a simple wine. There's some real sort of complexities behind it, and something that will continue to develop over time.
There's definitely a lot of fresh red fruits within it, but also I like it's got this hint of beetroot, this slightly earthiness, which is giving it a bit more of a fuller texture and a better mouthfeel. Yeah. It's got a very pleasing finish to it as well. This is a reach for the glass Pinot. It's light bodied, there's a nice texture, there's good definition. It's a real summer wine as well, as I said. I mean, it's quite light, as they will be within our climate. Yeah, very smooth, very well balanced, good texture. I mean, it's great what we can achieve in this country with Pinot, and I'm really pleased because it's such a wonderful grape variety when it goes right.
Yeah, I think the core point to that, guy, is when it goes right. So that's a real key aspect is when it goes right. I mean, we've been quite fortunate to make Pinot every year since we started 2017, when everyone said we couldn't make Pinot every year in a still wine format, and we've been able to do that. So I think it's a real testament to our growers. This is the reason why all our wines are single vineyards, to champion those guys and their hard work. So It's when we get it right in the vineyard, and it means we get it right in the winery. Fingers crossed, normally. It's well, we'll taste the Germanic clone Pinot as the last one, and there's a real stark difference in style. So we'll when we cross that path, I'll do a bit more of a deep dive into it. But there's a reason why that Germanic clones sometimes work well in these sort of climates, and it's because of the fact that our climate is really challenging. So
yeah, and a lot of the Germanic varieties have been tailored to help suit the cooler climates. So because obviously Germany is compared to other hot regions. Let's jump onto your next wine then.
2018 Nightjar Reserve. So we started in 2017, we made about 7,000 bottles. 2018, we had a really fun, interesting harvest in the sense that it was perfect weather at all the right times. So what does that mean in real terms? What that means is that we had an abundance of yields. So there's lots of fruit in the vines. It was a nice long summer. In fact, it's quite Indian summer. And because of these sort of climatic impacts and the ability to have a large amount of fruit, which has not been seen to date after that, gives the ability to get a little more access to different types of fruit. It also means we got more fruit from the growers we worked with previously. So we increased our production to about 22,000 bottles. It's about threefold, and from year 1 to year 2. And that then allowed us to hold back some wine for extra aging. And for me, I always believe that English wine needs aging, full stop. I think it's just, the fact is that we release wines too early in this country for what we make, and that includes our wines. And for us, that's merely down to cash flow. But we had the ability to hold back 1 barrel of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which we then called the reserve wines. In 2018, for the Pinot, we had a 40% whole cluster. We pushed the boat out quite a bit with that. And then we added the 10% new oak. So it's bags of structure and concentration. But we've aged it for 2 years and then aged it for 1 year in bottle. So in fact, compared to our normal night jar, this has an additional 2 years of aging on it. And I think shows a world of difference, not only in terms of the quality, but also in terms of what is thought of when we think about cool climate wines and ageability. And we're seeing more and more of these wines being released with later and later, not only for myself, but other producers who are like-minded. So, but I think it's a really nice and interesting comparison, because both are equally very good years in their own right. But stylistically, again, they're slightly different. I think that the 2018 is still just a baby, personally. I think that will continue to age for a long time.
It's definitely like a fuller wine, and I don't mean as in it's got a huge body and it's bold, but as you say, comparing it, it's got this lovely beetroot earthiness to it, but it's quite soft and delicate. It's not too overpowering. You still got a lot of the black fruits and the red fruits that are coming through. There's this nice underlying acidity, which is giving the wine some clarity and a lot of edge and definition. This is very much a summertime wine, and I think that's due to a lot of the berry elements that are coming through, and it's just a smooth, easy drinking red. Which is good, because as we were saying, some of the English reds can be too out of balance or a bit too it's like they're unhinged and not in a good way. So this is refined, it's honed, as you say. We'll see how it develops if anybody has any left in a number of years' time. But yeah, it's a very nice, easy drinking light red wine.
Yeah, and it's I think, they're very food compatible wines, so they can really adapt to a lot of different types of dishes, whether that be, reference to barbecue or a roast, or even something as delicate as, as pork as well. So it's quite versatile in that respect. I think to your point about English reds and find that balance, it's quite difficult. A lot of the English reds are made out of these sort of Germanic hybrids like Dornfelder or Rondo or Triumph d'Alsace, or which for me, I don't necessarily think sort of can make intrinsically interesting wines. That being said, I have had a Lemberger from Germany that I really, really enjoyed. I think there's a lot of promise for that variety if we can find a home for it here. But ultimately, those wines were able to get ripe or ripe-ish on a fairly regular basis to create, a series of red wines that are, relatively palatable and commercially viable for different people. Pinot Noir is a much more difficult beast because it's quite unforgiving if you don't get it as ripe as you need to. And then if you're trying to force it to be something it's not, ultimately that will sort of show in the wine, and you'll make these sort of clunky, sort of unbalanced, slightly greener styles of wine, which is quite unfortunate, because I think there's real potential behind it, which I think we'll see in the next one as well.
That's a good call. So let's move on to it.
So the final wine that we'll have, Guy, is really, it's what I refer to as our pandemic. Oh, I should probably sort of just quickly touch upon the labels for the Pinot. Nightjar is an indigenous spirit to the UK, and the bow tie comes from the tiling or facade of the Natural History Museum. So it's just a sort of slightly subtle hint, and it's really about sort of nature and wine and that sort of thing. And in fact, the nightjars often frequent the vineyard where the grapes come from. So it's kind of this whole, again, circular type thing. Trouble Every Day, the last wine, is in fact our pandemic wine in a lot of ways. It was sort of birthed out of we really want to mark the pandemic. It's been quite hard for a number of well, frankly, for a lot of people, and it's something that we wanted to embrace in our own way and sort of bring light to what would, I guess, ordinarily maybe be a slightly darker period. And so the name stems from Frank Zappa, a song by Frank Zappa, where when originally wrote, it was actually a protest song about racial inequalities for the most part, if you've ever heard it. So for us, it's not necessarily about racial inequality, but it's sort of alludes to sort of this really strange period of transition, both culturally and obviously economically with what's going on in the world. So we wanted to kind of put our own little stamp on that. And then continuing on with the experimental theme of London transport, the London, if you ever travel down the London Underground, we have you'll see a number of mazes sort of on the walls, and it's done by an artist and who's sort of been commissioned by TfL. And so we took that inspiration and put it on our label, but instead of taking an existing maze that's already been done and sort of adapting it, we actually kind of made it a bit more of our own, because that maze is the winery footprint. So if you look at the label, that is how our winery looks from above. So it's kind of gives us a bit more unique insight. So when people come to visit, they'll walk through the entrance, which is marked by the X or exit, and then that's the way forward into our site. So it's a bit of fun from our end, really.
That's all part of making it your own, though, isn't it? And having your own stamp, which is, I mean, it's done throughout
Absolutely.
the wine world, and it's such a great and fairly unique element to the industry.
For sure. And I think also, Guy, if people own their own wineries, then they're inherently self-indulgent. So why not be why not be a bit like that during by expressing on the label? So
Well, totally. I mean, you're making your own wine, your own drink. It's you're putting so much into it, from sourcing the grapes and barreling. It takes time. It is a labor of love making wine. So as you say, why stop with the wine? Put the labels too, and it's not a new thing to do, and it's great how unique the winemakers can make their wines, right through to the labels.
yeah, but at the end of the day, of course, for us, it's about the juice inside the bottle. The labels, I think, help sell the wine, but if the wine doesn't back it up, then ultimately we're sort of then going to be a gimmick, right? So we want to make sure that the juice is sound.
You want to sell more than one bottle.
Yeah, exactly. We want reoccurring. We want to have a reoccurring customer base. And speaking of drinking, this wine we only made in 2020 as not necessarily as a one-off, but we will probably make it again. But in 2021 was such a rough vintage that the grapes were good enough to make that wine again, the trouble every day. And what makes this wine really unique is that these grape clones are Germanic, which typically can be really austere. They have very dark fruit. They have thicker skins, which leads to sort of naturally higher amount of tannin in a wine. There's no whole cluster in this. This is completely destemmed. Again, this is Essex grown fruit. And it's from a new vineyard called Crow's Lane for us. And normally these grapes go into our rosé. So the way we organize our fruit pick is by clonal selection. So the grapes are picked into bins based upon the clones. So they come into the winery completely separated. And as they come in, I will taste them before we make a decision what we do with them. And I'll look for the flavor profile of these grapes and what I think it'll be better suited for. And so in this case, we had two grape clones, one being, they're both Geisenheim clones. So I think it's like 141 and the other one's 242. And the 141 tasted great for the rose, but the 242, which we only had, 700-800 kilos of, tasted fantastic as a still reds, or what I would think would become still reds. And so we ended up making 2 barrels of this wine and making a comparison of the Burgundian clones, our Nightjar, and the brand new wine. The idea from the beginning of Blackbook has always been, as I said, to make Pinot Noir Chardonnay. But we wanted to make a hierarchy of Pinot Noir Chardonnay, not dissimilar to the Burgundian way of having your Village or your Bourgognes and your Premier Crus or Grand Crus. So we want to do that in our own rights. And we managed to do that with our Chardonnay in 2018, but we had yet to do that with the Pinot. And so this provided us an opportunity to really showcase different styles of Pinot Noir, different grape clones, and different ways of doing things. So these were basically, they're completely destemmed, fermented in open top fermenters. We did a bit of extended fermentation maceration. So we left the grapes on the skins after the fermentation stopped. And then we popped into 2 old Burgundy barrels and again, a year of aging. So, we have the spring release and a autumn release. The spring release typically gets 6-7 months and the autumn releases get about a year. So, it has this sort of balancing act of when we think the wine is going to be ready. And for me, what this wine in particular shows is the purity of Germanic clones when we get them really, really ripe. And there's no sort of middle ground with Germanic clones. They're either really ripe or they're really green until they get really ripe, if that makes sense. So if you pick it too early, they're just not going to be goods. So you really have to let it hang. The hang time on these on the vine are the last grapes we pick every year. So to give you an indication, it's 2 or 3 weeks after everything else has been picked. And
when is that? Generally, are you talking as late as end of October, or not pushing quite that far?
Later. So
really?
these grapes came in these grapes came in the first week of November.
Okay.
In 2020. Last year, we're picking grapes in the second and third. Well, it's second 2.5 weeks into November.
Wow, God, that's quite risky with
Yeah.
early frost, or not even that early in November.
It's well, the problem is last year in particular is that it was a really wet, cold vintage.
Mm.
So our harvest was normally starts our first, second week of October. We didn't start until, I mean, we got some grapes in third week of October, but it really wasn't until last week of October when we started picking. So, which was highly unusual. But given the fact these are Germanic clones, we're able to hold on without the fear of disease. Frost is not like a huge deal at that point. Frost is a major deal right now when like buds are starting to become, you
Of
know,
course,
vines are coming out of the dormancy, and so we get the fresh green shoots and which are susceptible to frost. So from now until June, it's really sort of about frost watch. But this wine in particular is quite interesting because we get these amazingly dark fruits in it. It's like this bramble and sort of black licorice and sort of blueberry and blackberry and sort of, again, a bit more of this underlying sort of forest floor aspect. But it's quite lush, it's quite rich, but there's tannin, there's structure, which I think you don't get the same outcome if you just destem with the French Pinot clone. So, and that's from the thickness of the skins. It gives you the ability to sort of get that extraction out.
well, it's definitely much more along the black fruit elements of it. You still got some nice raspberries in there to give it a bit of sweetness is the wrong word, but I guess to make it a bit lighter and a bit more delicate. But it's great that you've got the earthiness in there, which is it's this lovely beetroot, blackcurrant, blackberry, and but you know, you've retained the light freshness, which is what Pinot can do so well, is balancing that with the texture and the depth and the added dimension. So it's another a lovely great wine, a good cool climate English red wine. So good job. I think, tell me what's coming next for Blackbook then. What are your future plans?
Oh, well, we have a few things in the pipeline. I mean, for us, we're looking at growth. So we have last year well, through the pandemic, the idea in 2020 is to increase our production. But as the pandemic hit, and we were a bit unsure as to how things were going to go, so we delayed our growth till last year. So we increased our production by about 30% last year. So we're now producing sort of around 25 to 30,000 bottles. After having sort of sat between 15 to 20,000 the past couple of years. We'll continue on that growth trajectory. So expansion is imminent. We'll be looking for a second site that potentially may incorporate some sort of tap room. We are certainly open to expanding elsewhere as well. So what I can say with definitive confidence is we will always try and sort of make some really fun, exciting wines and sort of push the boundaries. And, you know, who knows, maybe one day we'll even have our own site to give you some estate grown Blackbook wines. So, but for us, it's always pushing the boundaries, getting things up to date, growing the business, making people like you aware of us and your viewers, and just connecting really.
And more wine, most importantly, which is always good news.
And more good wine, guy. Absolutely. We just don't want the $2 chuck from the supermarkets. We want more good wine. So, but yeah, there's always fun things, you know. I always like to think that when you start to remain stagnant, that's a time to sell up, really, or get out. And so I think with any good business, you have to always continue to move forward and not think about remaining in one place. I'm also incredibly sort of, very, very much fidgety as well. So it's being in one place and just doing the same thing in the same routine kind of drives me a little bit nuts. I always have to look forward and push out and see what else we can do.
Well, you're definitely in the right trade then, Sergio, because that's inevitable. Thank you so much for sending these through.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for organizing and thanks for having me.
Pleasure.